Now before I could start this list, I should give a disclaimer. My taste in beat-em-ups might be a little unorthodox. Genre staples like Streets of Rage, Turtles in Time, and Final Fight bore me. I like more gimmicky beat-em-ups, like Comic Zone. I do like the concept of co-op beat-em-ups a lot, but I just feel like most games in the genre are too straightforward and simplistic. I'd like to see more interactive environments and emergent gameplay. With that being said, here's a list of less known and forgotten beat-em-ups that I like. Also note that I haven't got a Japanese PS1, so I haven't been able to play games like Mad Stalker, Tenchi o Kurau 2, and Panzer Bandit. And I haven't bothered with many 8-bit and more primitive-looking 16-bit beat-em-ups that might be considered hidden gems. Top Hunter is practically the first game I ever reviewed, and is one of my favorite Neo Geo titles. The graphics are really lush, to the point that I call it the poor man's Metal Slug in my original review. The enemy design is also humoristic, which leads me to believe that the original Metal Slug took as much visual inspiration from this game as it took gameplay influence from Gun Force 2. The visuals are great for '94 standards. The floating planets with waterfalls are especially impressive. Thankfully, the gameplay also delivers. Top Hunter is a smorgasbord of little mechanics picked up from some of the best Japanese games of the early 90s. You can pull chains like in Rystar, ride mecha suits like in Mega Man X, pull off quarter circle moves like in Street Fighter, and most notably of all, hop between the background and foreground like in Guardian Heroes, even though the game predates it by 2 years. This two-plane gameplay lends itself excellently to co-op. You can play with a friend without having to fight for the same enemies, and there are levers you can pull to drop heavy objects to crush more powerful enemies while your partner lures said enemies to the right spot. Though you can't always hop between the planes, sometimes there are obstacles and traps that force you to either side of the path. There are also a few small platforming segments. I personally like stuff like this, spicing up the gameplay in a beat-em-up and breaking the monotony of button smashing. I also recommend Top Hunter for the fact that the CD version doesn't suffer from horrible load times, and, if memory serves, it has better music as well, though you can find it from the MVS multicart as well. Spin Master is another cartoony Neo Geo side-scroller with good co-op mode that I recommend, though it's more of a platformer than a proper beat-em-up. Armored Warriors might be familiar to those of you who've played Cyberbots on the Saturn, which is a fighting game by Capcom which was way ahead of its time visually. It used a lot of art assets from Armored Warriors, which was released a year earlier. Both games feature mecha characters, beautiful visuals, and awesome soundtracks. You've got 4 different mechs to choose from, all of which have unique weapons and movesets. All characters can jump and carry a ranged weapon that uses ammo. There are also different pickups which change the body parts of your mech. From the chases to your weapons, you can pick up rocket launchers, laser cannons, flamethrowers, and drill claws, among other cool weapons. What really sets Armored Warriors apart from many other beat-em-ups is how swift your movements are, despite the fact that you're playing hulking mecha. Avoiding and grouping enemies together feels very manageable, and the action is always fast-paced. I personally prefer fast movement like this. Another cool feature is that when you're playing 3-player co-op, it's possible to join all your mechas together to form a more powerful robot. Hitting your enemies really feels good, as many of your attacks can strike multiple times and you can stun lock a group of enemies, so you feel really powerful. Oh, and the greatness of the soundtrack bears repeating. It's got that groovy, sort of metal-esque sound that many Capcom games have. It got me so pumped that it made me try to avoid dying as hard as I could, as game overs reset the songs. quarter margin, Heroes of the Marsh is the translated title of a Taiwanese DOS game. It's actually based on one of the 4 great classics of Chinese history, just like the excellent NES strategy game Bandit Kings of Ancient China. It was released in '97 by a company called Panda Entertainment, who also developed games for the ill-fated Super A-Can. Heroes of the Marsh was never translated to English, so you might have to use Google Translate to find a download like I did. But you can still play the game even if you don't understand Chinese. For what seems like a budget title, this game has some impressive visuals. The picturesque backgrounds are quite nice to look at, and the characters are well animated. The gameplay is also decent, if formulaic, though you can see the budget game qualities from the AI that gets stuck behind objects at times, and the winning strategy to every fight is stun locking your enemies so they don't get up. Though that goes both ways, as you can get stuck in a corner so that you can't defend yourself. Though later on there are more agile bosses who do force you to play more carefully. It's not a great game by any means, but it's competently made. If you compare it to Cyberlaw, which is also from '97, this game is way better. The Chinese setting gives it some novelty value, and whenever I can find a late '90s PC game that has some good 2D graphics, I'm all over that. But it's not something that I'd recommend if you're just looking for a great beat-em-up. Battle Circuit is one of the more unique games on this list. It's no Ninja Baseball Batman, but the enemies and some of the areas are quite weird. You work as a bounty hunter for a guy who reminds me of Stan from the Monkey Island games. And in between missions you can buy new moves for your characters with the coins you collect from enemies. As you hit enemies multiple times, they drop more coins, which makes pulling off combos like this very satisfying. This one actually allows for 4-player simultaneous co-op. Despite being made by Capcom, it isn't that popular, as it was only released in Japan and Europe and never brought over to North America. Like a lot of the longer beat-em-ups that have bosses with multiple forms, I think that this game overstays its welcome and grows repetitive towards the end. But the first few levels are great fun. Putti Lulla is one of those games like Cho Anarchy, that if you've heard of it, it's probably only because of how weird it is. The third level of this game is a total acid trip. Some of the bosses are bizarre to say the least, and you can summon a guy that throws your enemies into a microwave. But other than that, it's a fun and cutesy beat-em-up. The controls are very basic. You can whack your enemies with a stick and cast a limited amount of magic spells, and that's it. What sets Putti Lulla apart, besides its weirdness, is the cute-em-up style graphics. Considering that the original arcade game came out in '91, these graphics are absolutely amazing. The sprites are quite expressive, and especially the surrealistic backdrop of the final level is just pure eye candy to me. It's shallow, even for a beat-em-up, but it's only about 15 minutes long, so it doesn't overstay its welcome, and there's enough variation between the levels and enemies to keep things interesting. It's a nice game to play every now and then. Konami's Gaiopolis is a surprising title. On the surface, it looks like any other fantasy beat-em-up. You've got your level up system, and you can pick up more powerful weapons, and you can cast a screen-clearing magic spell, but it's actually more interesting than many other games like it. For starters, the vertical screen helps to differentiate it from other beat-em-ups. Although the level design doesn't utilize this much, it gives the world a more three-dimensional feel as your path isn't always straight. Sometimes you go sideways, backwards, or up the stairs. The story is more ambitious than in other games. Halfway through the game, it's revealed that the fantasy world exists on top of a ruined human civilization, so the seemingly out-of-place tank in the first level was actually a method of foreshadowing. It's quite interesting. It's also one of the longest, if not the longest game on this list. I usually don't like it when a shoot-em-up or a beat-em-up lasts an hour, but the length actually fits this game quite well, as it makes the twist in the story more impactful. And you feel genuine progression when you destroy low-level enemies with ease in the final stages. The gameplay also has a few distinguishing features. You do a lunge attack automatically when you try to run, and you can pick up pets that help you in fights. You can also break crates to gain items. The visuals also deserve praise. The isometric view adds a sense of depth to some areas, and a few of the levels have truly outstanding art design. Warrior Blade, Rastan's Saga Episode 3 is the oldest game on this list, but it's still rather gorgeous. This dual-screen arcade game has that more realistic and Western art style that you'd see in the late 80s and early 90s Japanese games. It looks more gritty and realistic than other games on this list, and I like that. The subject of why Japanese developers stopped copying the aesthetics of American movies and became more inspired by anime over the 90s is a very interesting topic, but one that's best saved for another video. You are given choice between 3 different characters, but when the titular Rastan looks like Conan the Barbarian, it's a no-brainer. The game is more brutal and bloody than most beat-em-ups, and it nails that Conan vibe perfectly. All that's missing is Man of War in the background, which is actually a good choice given how lacking the soundtrack is.
Fucking metal as fuck, dude!
Speaking of the sound, for some odd reason, many of the enemies in the game speak German. The gameplay is more or less like Golden Axe. You can hack your enemies and use magic every once in a while, but that's about it. However, there are set-piece moments to spice up the gameplay, like riding a dragon and sliding down a mountain. These warnings before jumps remind me that it's actually probably the easiest game on the list. You can rush the bosses without having to clear areas first, and the bosses themselves aren't as durable as in other games. But I don't mind, since it makes you feel like a badass barbarian. And I generally dislike bosses in beat-em-ups that soak up tons of damage and make you feel tired of all that button mashing. Hadriex and Dinosaurs is one of the more well-known Capcom beat-em-ups, so people more familiar with the genre might point out that it doesn't belong on a hidden gems list. But it's so damn fun that I think it's worth mentioning anyway. You actually aren't fighting against dinosaurs in this game. Instead, you'll be fighting against poachers who kill dinosaurs. The game is based on a comic which I've never read, Visually, it looks like the Punisher Arcade, which is another comic-based Capcom beat-em-up. It's surprisingly violent, actually. The blood isn't green like it usually is in English versions of arcade games. You can blow people to bits with your rocket launcher, and you can catch this one jerk in the act of slicing a dinosaur with a sword. And that just makes the gameplay so much more satisfying. Mowing down a row of enemies with a full auto gun always brings a smile to my face. And every time I boot up this game, I have a blast. Dungeon Magic is, in theory, my kind of beat-em-up. It has light RPG elements, and it emphasizes exploration, and every gamer's favorite thing in the world, isometric platforming. The levels are divided into smaller areas, and you don't just have to move from point A to B on a linear route. You can throw objects, which can be used to cover hidden secrets as well as for climbing out of reach areas. I think that a co-op based fantasy brawler in the vein of Dungeons & Dragons could be fantastic if done right, but this game never realizes the full potential of what I had in mind. I'd like to see more branching paths, problem solving and traps, ability to solve problems in multiple different ways based on which class you play, and so on. What hampers my enjoyment of Dungeon Magic most is the combat. There's way too much HP bloat. The hit detection is finicky, and it just isn't as fun to beat enemies as it is in other games. Taking down the bosses feels like doing work. But I've never tried playing the game in co-op mode. I think it might alleviate some of the problems I had with the bosses. As it is, I prefer Capcom's Dungeons & Dragons collection. You can get Dungeon Magic on the Taito Legends 2 compilation, which also has a couple other beat-em-ups in it, as well as Darius Gaiden, which alone makes it worth the price of admission. This is it! My favorite beat-em-up of all time. I like this game so much that this is actually the third time I'm reviewing it. Dirty Dwarves stands out amongst other games on this list for the fact that it was developed by a Western developer, Appaloosa Interactive, who are also known for such titles as Echo the Dolphin and Colibri. Like the title suggests, it's a very humorous game. The story tells about three dwarves who were summoned from a pen and paper RPG to help four super-intelligent test tube children who are being held against their will in the basement of a military installation, being forced to develop experimental weapons. The game takes place on the streets of New York, where you'll come across crazy homeless women, exhibitionists, and even living buildings. It's a very zany game, in the vein of titles such as Earthworm Jim and the crazy cartoons that were popular at the time. What sets it apart from other beat-em-ups is the fact that you control three characters at once. All three of the dwarves carry different weapons and have slightly different movesets. One dwarf carries a shotgun, another a baseball bat and balls, and the third one throws bowling pins and balls at his enemies. The lower buttons are assigned to melee attack, ranged attack, and jump, and the upper buttons can do powerful special moves that consume skull icons that you collect. You can also spend 3 skulls to morph all your dwarves into one big killing machine for a short period of time. When you're playing alone, you can switch between the characters by pressing the shoulder buttons, but what really elevates Dirty Dwarves in my book is the multiplayer. Instead of having a regular health bar, your characters die from just one hit, but can be revived at any time by another dwarf. This mechanic makes the 3-player co-op absolutely amazing, as you really have to communicate and cooperate with other players if you want to survive. The fact that there's some minor platforming and obstacles like this forces you to work as a team. This game alone makes the Saturn's multi-tap worth purchasing, though chances are most fans of the genre already bought one for Guardian Heroes. However, the game is not perfect. It suffers from what I like to call the Earthworm Jim syndrome, that is, unnecessary minigames between stages. The back cover boasts about 15 levels, but only about half of those are proper ones. There also aren't any checkpoints, so you have to beat all levels with just one life. But thanks to the save system, you can load and skip any level you've beaten at least once, so on a second playthrough, you don't have to deal with all those mini-games. I also really like the dark cartoon look of the game. The twisted art style reminds me of Day of the Tentacle of all games, which is actually quite fitting, as it too is the best game in its genre, at least in my opinion.